My name is Mike. I am 38 years old, and I have been married to my wife, Jessica, for 12 years. We met back in college during my junior year. Jessica was the life of every room she entered, the kind of person who could strike up a conversation with anyone and leave them charmed within minutes. I, on the other hand, was the quiet guy, always meticulous and focused, more comfortable in the library than at a party. Jessica used to tease me, saying she had rescued me from a life of overthinking. She was not entirely wrong. Jessica had this spark, this energy that drew people to her like moths to a flame. In the early days, our connection felt effortless. She was the adventurous one, booking spontaneous trips or deciding on a whim to try a new activity at the park. I was the planner, the guy who made sure we could afford her bursts of enthusiasm. Together, we balanced each other out, but something shifted in the last year. Maybe it began when Jessica started taking on more demanding projects at her marketing firm. With business booming, her workload and her hours became unpredictable. At first, I chalked it up to the nature of her job. Marketing campaigns have tight deadlines, and Jessica thrived in the hustle. Then the late nights began. They started as occasional, but soon became a regular pattern. Family dinners turned into me eating alone, and our Friday nights, spent binging TV shows, gave way to her text messages apologizing for last-minute work meetings. When I joked about her new executive lifestyle one night, she laughed and promised that things would slow down soon. I wanted to trust her words, but small inconsistencies crept in. One evening, she came home hours later than expected. When I asked about her day, she mumbled something about a client meeting running long. Her nonchalant tone did not sit right with me. Jessica, who had always been open about every detail of her life, now felt like someone hiding behind vague stories. The first real crack appeared on a Sunday. Jessica was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced over, not out of suspicion, but curiosity. The notification read, "Lunch with RM." My brow furrowed. She had told me earlier she was meeting her friend Sarah for lunch. Sarah's initials were not RM. When I casually asked her later about lunch, she went on about Sarah's upcoming plans to visit Europe. Something about her response felt rehearsed, like she was reciting a script. I pushed the doubt aside, telling myself that Jessica had always been trustworthy. Still, the signs grew harder to ignore. She would angle her phone away when texting, take calls in the bedroom with the door shut, and close her laptop screen quickly when I walked into the room. Each moment, minor on its own, began to pile up into something I could not dismiss. One evening, as Jessica scrolled through her phone on the couch, I joked, "You and your phone seem inseparable these days." She chuckled, but did not look up, and the tension between us felt like a wall I could not climb. Then came the night everything changed. Jessica told me she had an evening yoga class, a new hobby she had picked up in recent months. Something inside me, it might have been instinct or sheer frustration, compelled me to drive to the studio she mentioned. I had never done anything like that before, but the unease was too loud to ignore. When I arrived, I parked across the street and watched the studio's front door. People began trickling out after the session ended. Mats rolled under their arms. But Jessica did not appear. Confused, I decided to check the area nearby. That is when I saw her, across the street in a dimly lit park, standing near a bench. She was not alone. A man stood with her, holding out a folded piece of paper that she slipped into her pocket. Their body language told me everything I needed to know. The way they stood close, the subtle touch of her hand on his arm, the way her laugh rang through the quiet night. I turned and walked away, my chest tight and my mind racing. When Jessica returned home later that evening, she greeted me with the same smile she always did, kissed me on the cheek, and asked about my night. I played along, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and betrayal. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I felt like the ground beneath me had cracked wide open. The woman I thought I knew had become a stranger, and I was not sure if I would ever find solid footing again. The weekend after that night in the park, Jessica mentioned she had plans to help organize her friend Amanda's bridal shower. She seemed genuinely excited, buzzing with energy all week as she texted the other bridesmaids about decorations, games, and the theme. I wanted to match her enthusiasm, or at least pretend I did, but my thoughts kept circling back to what I had seen. The image of her with that man, standing close under the dim lights, played over and over in my mind, like a stubborn song I could not silence. Jessica's excitement was infectious, though, and I found myself nodding along as she rattled off details about what Amanda's favorite snacks were, how they planned to decorate the space, and whether she should pick up flowers for the centerpieces. She seemed so invested in every little detail, her smile so genuine, that I almost convinced myself I had imagined the tension of the past few weeks. Almost. The evening of the bridal shower, Jessica came downstairs dressed in fitted jeans and a sleek leather jacket. She twirled in front of me, her face glowing with confidence. "What do you think?" she asked with a grin. "Casual but cute enough for pictures?" "You look great," I replied, forcing a smile. "You'll definitely steal the show." She laughed and leaned down to kiss me on the cheek. "Do not wait up. These girls love to drag things out. You know how it is?" I nodded, watching as she grabbed her bag and headed out the door. The sound of her car pulling out of the driveway lingered longer than usual in the silence of the house. I tried to focus on something else, ordered a pizza, flipped through channels, and eventually settled on a football game I was not particularly interested in. But the minutes crawled by, each one amplifying the nagging doubt in the back of my mind. Where was she really? Who was she really with? Around 2 a.m., I heard the faint creak of the front door opening. Jessica stepped inside, her laughter soft and slightly unsteady, her hair tousled in a way that suggested more than just dancing or party games. She kicked off her shoes and glanced at me with a smile, her cheeks flushed. "You're still up?" she asked lightly, her voice carrying a slight slur. "It was such a fun night." "Sounds like it," I replied, keeping my tone as even as I could. "How did the shower go?" "Oh, Amanda loved it. Everyone had a blast," she said, waving a hand as if to emphasize how much fun they had. Her words were breezy, her demeanor casual, like everything about the evening had been perfectly ordinary. But something about the way she avoided eye contact, how quickly she brushed past the details, made my stomach twist. As she headed upstairs, a small detail gnawed at me. Earlier in the day, she had mentioned helping to clean up after the party. Yet, as she walked past, her hands looked pristine, not a smudge of frosting, not a hint of glitter or glue from all the crafts and decorations they were supposedly handling. I tried to dismiss the thought, telling myself I was being overly critical, but the knot in my stomach only tightened. I followed her upstairs a few minutes later, unable to shake the sense that something was off. Jessica had draped her leather jacket over the chair in our bedroom, and as she undressed, another detail stopped me cold. She was not wearing the bra I had seen her put on earlier that evening. In fact, she was not wearing any undergarments at all. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. My chest tightened as I fought to keep my breathing steady. Questions raced through my mind, each one more painful than the last, but I stayed silent. I told myself there could be an explanation, that maybe I had overlooked something, but the logic sounded hollow, even to me. Jessica crawled into bed and fell asleep almost instantly, her breathing soft and steady. Meanwhile, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spinning out of control. The details of the night replayed in my mind like a loop I could not escape. Her pristine hands, her missing undergarments, her casual but rehearsed tone, it all pointed to something I did not want to admit. The next morning, Jessica was her usual cheerful self. She sipped her coffee, chatting about how much fun Amanda had, how the games were a hit, and how everything had gone off without a hitch. She seemed completely at ease, as though nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. My suspicions were no longer quiet whispers in the back of my mind. They were loud, insistent truths I could not ignore. That afternoon, Jessica was busy in the backyard, sorting through some decorations she had borrowed for the party. Her phone sat on the kitchen counter, plugged into the charger. Normally, I would not have thought twice about it. I had always trusted her. But this time, curiosity burned too brightly to resist. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone and unlocked it. Her messages were mostly harmless: group chats with friends, work updates, reminders about upcoming events. But then I saw it, a thread with a name that stopped me cold. Ara. The messages were sparse, but the tone was unmistakably intimate. Asterisk, last night was amazing. Asterisk, asterisk, I wish we had more time together. Asterisk. My stomach churned as I scrolled through the thread, my hands trembling. The earlier messages painted a picture I did not want to see. Vague references to meetings, cryptic mentions of private conversations, and a note about something left behind. Each line felt like a puzzle piece, and together they formed an image I had been trying to avoid. I carefully placed the phone back where I had found it, my heart pounding. That evening, as Jessica casually asked if I wanted takeout for dinner, I forced myself to act normal. I nodded, agreed to pizza, and even managed to laugh at one of her jokes. But inside, I was unraveling. Every glance, every word, every touch felt like part of a performance, a charade we were both participating in, though I did not know the script. I was not ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed more clarity, more proof. But the cracks in our relationship had grown into chasms, and I knew they would not disappear on their own. The days that followed were agonizing. Every interaction with Jessica felt like walking on eggshells. On the surface, everything seemed normal. She laughed at her favorite sitcoms, planned meals for the week, and even suggested we take a weekend trip together. But beneath the facade, I felt an ever-growing distance, a void that no amount of small talk or shared moments could bridge. I became hyper-aware of her actions. The way she would angle her phone away when texting. The way her tone shifted when she answered calls in another room. The way her excuses about late nights at work or last-minute errands seemed to pile up without explanation. Each moment added to the storm brewing in my chest. One evening, Jessica mentioned she had an off-site meeting with a new client after work. Her tone was casual, almost dismissive, as if she were giving me an unimportant detail about her day. "It's probably going to run late," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Do not wait up, okay?" "Sure," I replied, trying to mask the tightness in my voice. "Hope it goes well." As she left, I sat on the couch, staring at the door long after it had closed. Something about her demeanor gnawed at me. Her offhand comment about the meeting felt rehearsed, as though she had anticipated my questions before I even asked them. And yet, I did not press her. I simply nodded, watching her walk out the door. But I could not sit still. The doubt was like an itch I could not scratch. And after an hour of pacing the house, I grabbed my keys and drove to the address she had mentioned for the meeting. It was supposed to be at a co-working space downtown, a neutral location for her client discussions. When I arrived, the building was dark, its parking lot empty. I felt my chest tighten as I sat there, gripping the steering wheel. Had I misunderstood? Had I gotten the address wrong? Or had Jessica lied outright? The possibilities swirled in my mind, each one more damning than the last. Determined to get answers, I started driving around the nearby streets, scanning for any sign of her car. The city felt eerily quiet, the street lights casting long shadows across the pavement. After 20 minutes of aimless searching, I spotted her car parked outside a gym, one I knew she did not belong to. My stomach dropped. I parked a block away and watched, unsure of what to do next. Part of me wanted to storm inside, demand answers, and end this torment once and for all. But another part of me, a quieter, more rational voice, urged caution. I needed proof, not assumptions. Taking a deep breath, I decided to wait. About 30 minutes later, Jessica emerged from the gym, not alone. A man walked beside her, his hand brushing hers as they spoke. They looked at ease, their laughter echoing faintly in the quiet night. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I watched as they lingered by her car, their conversation punctuated by shared smiles and gestures. Jessica reached into her bag and handed the man something, a folded piece of paper or maybe a card. He slipped it into his pocket and leaned in, his voice low enough that I could not hear. She nodded, her expression softening in a way that made my heart ache. I could not watch anymore. Without thinking, I started the car and drove away. The image of them burned into my mind. My thoughts raced as I replayed what I had seen, each detail another weight pressing down on my chest. Jessica's laughter, the man's casual closeness, the ease with which they interacted, it all felt like confirmation of what I had feared. When I got home, the house felt emptier than ever. I sat in the dark living room, staring at nothing, my mind a storm of emotions. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak. They all swirled together, making it impossible to think clearly. I wanted to confront Jessica, to demand the truth, but I knew I needed to approach it carefully. Without concrete evidence, she could easily deny everything, turning the conversation into yet another layer of deception. Jessica came home an hour later, her keys jangling as she stepped through the door. "Hey," she called out, her voice light and cheerful. "Still awake?" I forced myself to sound casual. "Yeah, just watching TV." She smiled, setting her bag down by the door. "The meeting went great. It looks like this client might be a big win for us." I nodded, watching her closely. Her expression was calm, her tone steady, as if nothing unusual had happened. The disconnect between her words and what I had seen was almost unbearable. As she headed upstairs to get ready for bed, I sat motionless, my mind churning with questions. How long had this been going on? Who was this man? And most importantly, what was I going to do about it? That night, I barely slept. The weight of my suspicions pressed down on me, making it impossible to find peace. The cracks in our relationship were no longer just visible. They had become gaping wounds, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The next few days felt like I was living in a fog. Jessica carried on as if everything was perfectly normal, her cheerful demeanor a sharp contrast to the turmoil boiling inside me. Every smile she gave, every casual touch, felt hollow, like a performance meant to distract me from the truth I had witnessed. I tried to focus on work, to drown myself in emails and meetings, but the doubt never left my mind. On Wednesday evening, Jessica announced she would be heading out again, this time to meet her friend Ashley for dinner. Her tone was casual, even upbeat, as she mentioned how much she missed catching up with Ashley and how long it had been since they last hung out. I nodded, my expression neutral, but inside, I knew I had to do something. As soon as she left, I grabbed my laptop and began digging. I had avoided going too deep before, hesitant to cross a line, but now I felt like I had no choice. I started with her social media accounts, scrolling through recent posts and tagged photos. Everything seemed innocuous. Pictures of her with friends, work-related updates, a few selfies from recent outings. But none of it aligned with the timeline she had been feeding me. Then I opened her email. She had shared her password with me years ago, back when we were planning a trip together and needed to coordinate itineraries. At the time, it felt like a sign of trust, a small gesture that meant we had nothing to hide. Now, using that password felt like a betrayal of my own principles, but I could not stop myself. Her inbox was overwhelming. Hundreds of messages about work, promotions from stores, and spam. I scrolled through quickly, searching for anything out of place. That was when I saw it. An email chain with a subject line that simply read, "Lunch plans." It was from Ryan M., and the content was brief but telling. They had exchanged a few messages about meeting at a park downtown for lunch. The most recent email was from Ryan, thanking her for their time together and mentioning how much he enjoyed her company. My heart sank. There it was, proof that she had been seeing him outside of work, away from prying eyes. The casual tone of the emails felt calculated, as though they were trying to mask the true nature of their relationship. I sat back in my chair, my chest tight. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears as 1,000 thoughts collided in my mind. This was no longer just a suspicion. It was real, undeniable. Jessica was lying to me, and now I had the evidence to confront her. But still, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to march into the next room, hold up the emails, and demand answers. Another part of me, the part still clinging to the life we had built together, wanted to wait, to gather more, to be absolutely certain before taking the next step. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. On Friday afternoon, Jessica called to let me know she would be working late again. Her voice was cheerful, almost too cheerful, as she explained that a new campaign was taking up more of her time. "I'll grab something to eat on my way home," she said. "Do not wait up." I muttered a quick response, hanging up before my voice betrayed me. Then, I grabbed my keys and left the house. This time, I was determined to follow her, to see for myself what was really going on. It did not take long to find her. She was parked outside a small coffee shop on the edge of town, a place we had never been to together. From across the street, I watched as she stepped out of her car, glancing around nervously before heading inside. Moments later, Ryan appeared, walking toward the entrance with a confident stride. I stayed in my car, my pulse racing as I watched them through the window. They sat at a corner table, leaning in close as they talked. Jessica's face lit up with a smile I had not seen in months, her laughter reaching me even from this distance. Ryan reached across the table, his hand brushing hers for just a moment before she pulled back, glancing around. It felt like a punch to the stomach. Every doubt, every suspicion, was now confirmed in the clearest way possible. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white as I fought the urge to storm in and confront them. But something stopped me, fear, maybe, or the need to process what I was seeing before I acted. When they finally left, parting with a quick hug in the parking lot, I waited until Jessica drove off before following her home. She walked through the door an hour later, her expression calm and unbothered, as though she had just come from the office. "How was your evening?" she asked, dropping her bag by the door. I stared at her, my throat tight. "Fine," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just fine." That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake, my mind racing with questions. How long had this been going on? How deep did their connection run? And most importantly, what was I going to do next? The cracks in our relationship had turned into gaping holes, and there was no way to repair them without confronting the truth. But as much as I dreaded it, I knew that moment was coming, and soon. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of dread weighing heavily on my chest. Jessica was already up, humming softly as she brewed coffee in the kitchen. The scene felt so normal, so painfully mundane, that it almost made me second-guess myself. But the images from the coffee shop, the emails, and the countless little lies she had told me were burned into my mind. I could not ignore them any longer. As I walked into the kitchen, Jessica turned to me with a bright smile. "Good morning. Coffee's ready. Want some eggs?" I was thinking of making omelets. I shook my head, my stomach too knotted to think about food. "We need to talk," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Her smile faltered. "Okay, what about?" She set the spatula down, her hands resting on the counter. The casual ease in her posture was infuriating. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "About where you were last night. About who you were with." Her face froze, the color draining from her cheeks. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling just slightly. "Do not do this, Jessica," I said, my tone firm. "I followed you. I saw you at the coffee shop. I saw you with him." For a moment, the kitchen was completely silent. Jessica's eyes darted to the floor, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "It is not what you think," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I laughed bitterly. "It is not what I think? You have been lying to me for weeks, maybe longer. I found the emails, Jessica. I saw the way you looked at him last night. So please enlighten me. What exactly am I supposed to think? Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at me, her expression a mixture of guilt and desperation. I never meant for this to happen, she said, her voice breaking. Ryan he was someone I could talk to. Someone who made me feel seen. Her words hit me like a blow. Seen? I repeated, my voice rising. You needed someone else to make you feel seen? What about me, Jessica? What about the 12 years we have spent building a life together? Was I invisible to you? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. It was not like that. I love you, Mike. I do. But somewhere along the way, I felt like we were just going through the motions. Like I was more of a roommate than a wife. I stared at her, my chest tight with a mix of anger and heartbreak. So, instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix things, you turned to someone else? You lied to me, Jessica. Over and over. I know, she said, her voice breaking. I know I messed up, and I am sorry. I ended things with Ryan weeks ago. I was trying to find a way back to us, but I did not know how to tell you. Her words felt hollow, like a flimsy attempt to cover the damage that had already been done. Do you really think that matters now? I asked, my voice cracking. The trust is gone, Jessica. Every time you told me you were working late, every time you brushed me off, it all adds up. How am I supposed to believe anything you say after this? She sobbed openly now, her hands shaking as she reached for me. Please, Mike, I will do whatever it takes to fix this. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just give me a chance. I stepped back, her touch feeling foreign and wrong. I need time, I said, my voice cold. Time to figure out if this is even something worth saving. Her sobs grew louder, but I could not bring myself to comfort her. Instead, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, my mind racing with the enormity of what had just unfolded. Over the next few days, the house felt like a battlefield, each interaction between us fraught with tension. Jessica tried repeatedly to talk to me, to apologize, but I could not bring myself to engage. I spent most of my time at work or taking long drives trying to clear my head. Jessica sent me long text messages while I was out, pouring out her remorse and begging for another chance. Each message was a reminder of the trust she had shattered, and I found myself unable to respond. One evening, I finally decided to reach out to my best friend, Eric. We had not talked much recently, but I needed someone to confide in. When I told him what had happened, he was silent for a long moment before letting out a low whistle. Man, I do not even know what to say, he admitted. That is brutal. Yeah, I said, staring out at the horizon as I sat in my car. I do not know what to do. Part of me wants to believe her, to think we can fix this. But another part of me feels like it is over. Like no matter what she says or does, I will never be able to trust her again. Eric sighed. Trust is everything in a relationship, Mike. If you do not have that, what do you have? His words echoed in my mind long after the call ended. Trust. It was the foundation of everything we had built. And now it felt like that foundation had been destroyed, leaving nothing but rubble in its place. That night, as I lay awake in the guest room, I realized I had a decision to make. I could either try to rebuild with Jessica, knowing it would take years to repair the damage, or I could walk away and start over. Neither option felt easy, but I knew I could not keep living in limbo. The days that followed felt like a blur. Jessica made every effort to reach out, leaving notes on the kitchen counter, sending heartfelt messages, and even booking a counseling session without consulting me. Her desperation was palpable, but for me, the damage had been done. Every time I saw her, I felt a mix of love for the woman I thought I knew and bitterness toward the one who had betrayed me. I took long drives to clear my head, the silence of the car offering a strange kind of comfort. One afternoon, I found myself parked by the lake where Jessica and I used to spend summer evenings. The sight of the calm water, reflecting the soft hues of the setting sun, brought a pang of nostalgia and pain. I pulled out my phone and opened my messages. Jessica had sent another one that morning. Asterisk, Mike, I know I messed up in ways I cannot undo. But I love you. I always have. Please, let us try to fix this. You mean everything to me? Asterisk. I stared at the screen, her words blurring as tears welled in my eyes. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to go back to a time when our love felt unshakable. But could I ever truly trust her again? That evening, I decided to attend the counseling session she had scheduled. Not because I was ready to forgive her, but because I needed answers. I needed to hear her admit the full truth in front of someone who could help us navigate the wreckage of our relationship. The counselor, a calm, soft-spoken man named Dr. Stevens, welcomed us into his office. The room was warm and inviting, with shelves lined with books and a faint scent of lavender in the air. Jessica sat on the couch beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes red from crying. Dr. Stevens began with simple questions, asking us to share what had brought us to this point. Jessica spoke first, her voice trembling as she recounted her feelings of loneliness and disconnect in our marriage. She described how Ryan had become a source of comfort, someone who listened when she felt unheard. "I know I made the wrong choice," she said, her voice breaking. "But it was never about not loving Mike. It was about feeling invisible." Her words cut deep, and when it was my turn to speak, I struggled to find the right ones. "I do not know if I can believe anything she says anymore," I admitted. "She lied to me for months. She built a whole other life behind my back. How do you come back from that?" Dr. Stevens nodded, his expression compassionate. "Trust is difficult to rebuild, but it is not impossible. It requires transparency, patience, and a willingness to confront the pain head-on. But the question is, do you both want to try?" I glanced at Jessica, her tear-streaked face filled with hope and desperation. Part of me wanted to say yes, to give her the chance to prove herself. But another part of me, the part that had been shattered by her betrayal, held back. "I do not know," I said honestly. "I need time to figure that out." Jessica nodded, her shoulders slumping. "I will give you all the time you need," she whispered. The following weeks were some of the hardest of my life. I moved into the guest room, creating a physical and emotional distance between us. Jessica made every effort to show she was committed to fixing things, canceling her gym membership, deleting Ryan's contact information, and offering to let me track her phone. But no matter what she did, I could not shake the image of her with him, the sound of her laughter as they sat together at the coffee shop. One evening, I found myself scrolling through photos on my phone, searching for a glimpse of the happiness we used to share. There were pictures of us hiking in the mountains, celebrating anniversaries, and laughing at friends' weddings. Each image was a painful reminder of what we had lost. I called Eric again, desperate for some clarity. "How do you know when it is time to walk away?" I asked him. Eric sighed, his voice heavy with sympathy. "It is different for everyone, man. But if the thought of staying hurts more than the thought of leaving, maybe that is your answer." His words stayed with me long after the call ended. That night, I sat in the guest room, staring at the blank walls, and realized that my heart had already made its decision. Staying with Jessica would mean living in constant doubt, questioning every late night and every unanswered text. It was a life I could not bear to live. The next morning, I asked Jessica to sit down. She looked at me with cautious hope, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I've been thinking a lot about us," I began, my voice steady but heavy. "And I have realized something. I cannot move forward. The trust is gone, and without it, we do not have a foundation to build on." Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please, Mike," she begged, "do not give up on us. I will do whatever it takes." I shook my head, my own tears threatening to fall. "I am sorry, Jessica. I cannot do this anymore." She sobbed, her hands covering her face, and I felt my heart break all over again. But deep down, I knew I was making the right choice for both of us. If you were in my shoes, would you have given Jessica a second chance to rebuild the trust, or would you have made the same decision to move on? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective.